as we were going through margin sort of as a team, I was thinking about this, and for me, margin meant whatever I have that's left over, right? Which, as we're talking through like different areas of margin in my life, margin of finances like we talked about last time, margin of time, or the margin of our life like we're talking about next week, I'm sitting there going, well, that doesn't make any sense. Because there's no point in my life that I'm sitting there going, oh, look at all this money that I have at the end of the month, right? Never done that before. Or like at the end of my day, I'm sitting there going, I just have so much time to do all the things that I love. Anybody? Right. This doesn't make any sense. If we're defining margin as that which we have left over at the end, we're never going to have margin in our life. It's no wonder why we're running around on empty. So we had to sit down and talk about, all right, what does margin actually mean? What does it look like? And the way we defined margin at the beginning of this series was margin is that which you have beyond what is necessary. That which you have beyond what is necessary. And this has been an exercise in defining what is necessary in our life, getting the first things first again. So margin, as we've been seeking after in this series, is that. But as we look at what we're looking at today, margin of heart, it doesn't really make sense. Like, what do you mean beyond what is necessary in my heart, in my soul? That doesn't really make a ton of sense. So what does margin of heart look like? I want to throw this out there. Margin of heart, we're going to unpack this definition, so don't worry about writing it down or anything. Margin of heart, as we're going to look at today, is the continual rhythm and practice of intentionally cultivating space in our heart and our soul that guides that which we say and do. Another way to say it is the condition of our heart directs the condition of our lives. And that's just true, isn't it? No matter what's going on around us, the condition of our heart always directs the condition of our lives. And that sounds great. Like that sounds like something I could tweet, and it'd be awesome. But what does that mean? It's sort of like when your grandma says, well, give it to God. And you're like, okay, that was helpful. Or like when you're sad and somebody's like, don't be depressed. You fixed it, nailed it. So we're going to unpack what that looks like. But if you're ready and if you're actually in that spot going, I am done being tired, I am done just running on empty, I'm done seeing the effects of it in my family, in my life, if you're there, I want you to say, I'm ready to receive. We're going to pray before we dive in. God, thanks for today. God, I echo the prayer of our church this morning, that God, the words that I say would not be my own, but they would be yours. And God, if I say something that's not of you, let it fade away. But God, if you're speaking into our hearts, into our lives today, God, let it launch us to freedom. Let it launch us to be able to breathe for the first time in a long time. God, let it launch us to rest. God, we love you. We praise you. We pray all these things in the powerful, resurrected name of Jesus Christ. Amen? So in the effort of creating margin, I took up another hobby. Which doesn't really make sense, but this was more of just like, I need to laugh every once in a while. So anybody podcast people? Like, I've been binging podcasts lately, and they're not like useful podcasts. So let me just clarify that. Like, I'm not growing in my understanding of wisdom and knowledge. I'm just growing. It's literally useless facts and historical events that have no impact whatsoever on my life. Right, like this is one I learned yesterday. Did you know, or rather just think about this, the inside of a watermelon, we see it red, but when it's inside the watermelon, it's not red. Because to be a color means to reflect light. There's no light in the watermelon. Like this is the kind of stuff that I've spent my time learning, okay? So I'm not getting like more holier stuff. Anyway, it's getting me to a point where like Trivial Pursuit might be something that I one day play in my life, but probably not. But like that's the kind of stuff that I'm learning. Anyway, I was diving into something that they referenced in this podcast that I'm sitting there when they said it, and I was like, that's not true. So I started looking at it, and don't Google this because it's wildly depressing. Or do just go to a counselor afterwards. Y'all know nuclear bombs, right? Like yeah, crazy. From World War II to today, there have been like 100 plus almost nuclear disasters. Like literally classified by the world as whoopsies. Which is terrifying and does not let me sleep good at night, right? And so I'm sitting there going, there's no way that's true. One of them caught my eye, and it happened in the U.S., 1961. So Nuclear warheads, kind of dangerous. A bunch of countries around the world have them. It's a good time for everybody. But as the U.S. was transporting a couple, there was a Boeing B-52 Stratofortress, which is like the coolest name ever for an airplane, but it's a B-52 bomber, all right? So giant plane. Something happened in the plane as it was flying over North Carolina in 1961, where it basically started just breaking apart in the sky. The crew had to abandon ship, which meant that the 2 nuclear warheads that were on board being transported just got dropped over North Carolina. This is classified as a whoopsie. So, these bombs drop mid-flight over North Carolina, which is insane to think about. But when we think about like nuclear warheads, we think like World War II, those that were launched. These that were on board were Mark 39s, which meant that they were 250 times more powerful than the ones used in World War II. So these guys had like an 8.5-mile radius of 100% kill rate, and then whatever else is on the other side of it. This is not a whoopsie, friends, right? Anyway, so these bombs were accidentally dropped from the plane, breaking apart over an innocent town in North Carolina. But then after the crash, they all sort of had this aha moment of going, wait a second, the bombs didn't go off. Because, there's not death and destruction everywhere. Let's send in a team to go find them. So they did. And the first bomb that was found, the team that went in to retrieve it, did an initial evaluative process of going, okay, if we touch it, are we going to die? Here's what they found. So Mark 39 specifically, they had a 6-step process that they had to go through before detonation, okay? It's good thing, safety process, right? The first one they found was hanging in a tree by its parachute, which is all sorts of comforting. And they found that 5 of the 6 steps were already completed. The last one was a switch, like a light switch, that was supposed to be flipped on impact. One switch away before it all blew up. And that was insane to me. And that story's crazy, but I was looking at it, and I had just this kind of God moment in the back of my mind over and over again as I was reading through this story. And it was just sort of that aha moment in my life of going, isn't that how I usually live my life? Like I'm one flip switch away from everything blowing up. I'm one flip switch away from everything in my life just blowing up. And I know I'm not the only one in here either. There's a lot of us who live every single day one switch away from blowing something up in our lives, whether it's blowing up our finances, blowing up our marriage, blowing up our jobs, blowing up our relationships with our kids, blowing up our friendships, blowing up our mental health, blowing up our chances at getting into that school that we really want to go to, blowing up the parts of our lives that are teeming with life. But the moment that hits, it's all gone. I'm one switch away, but we don't do anything about it either. Why? Because nothing bad's happened yet, so why would I ever course correct? Sort of why we have hundreds of almost nuclear disasters across the globe. Why would we ever fix it? Nothing's happened. Margin of heart is the practice of creating space in their hearts, in our hearts, for God to disarm the triggers and the tensions of our own brokenness so that our lives are allowed to thrive and not just survive day to day. That's what I want to do. I want to thrive, not just survive. And listen, the brokenness that I'm talking about in our lives, some of it is a result of decisions that we made that we're facing the consequences of, but a lot of it isn't. Some of us in here are sitting with brokenness and hurt in our life because of the people that we trusted most to take care of us in our life failed. And there was nothing you could do about it. There's absolutely nothing. And we're dealing with that impact. Some of us in here, there's nothing that's been done to us, but things that are happening around of us have caused brokenness in our life that now we're having to unpack. And we just don't know what to do with it. But we're all carrying this brokenness. And this brokenness often leads me in this place of vulnerability that I look at myself in the mirror sometimes, some mornings, and I barely recognize I don't recognize the good things in my life anymore. I'm constantly looking at other people's life, or I'm constantly looking over there, just going, man, wouldn't that be amazing? Or I don't recognize the joy of what I do in ministry, that which I've been called to anymore, or the times that I look at myself in the mirror and I don't even recognize me. So then I start to try and fix things that are going on, and then I try and over-control those things, which leads to really great relationships and a lot of hurt and a lot of brokenness and just really good conversations, doesn't it? And then at the end of it all, I'm just looking around trying to figure out what the heck happened. Because all it took was that last switch before it all blew up. Anybody else? So the question is, how do I create margin in my heart so that moments like that just don't happen, but we don't even get close? so that we get to a place where no matter what happens in our world, we're okay. How do we do that? That's what we're talking about today. How do we not just survive, but thrive? So we can evaluate our heart condition so that that's true. So that we could be the men and women that God called and created us to be. Well, there's a story in the Bible that is a guy named Samson. Everybody say Samson. Samson is a really unique story that every time I read through his life, I'm just sitting there going, this guy is the worst. So we're going to dive into his life because I believe that it gives us a unique and powerful look into what building margin in our heart means. So we're all going to pull open our Bibles together, whether your physical Bible, your digital Bible, whatever it is, but we all pull open our Bibles together around here to keep each other accountable. Not just take some pastor's word for it, but say, God, did you actually say the things we're talking about today? If so, what does that mean for my life moving forward? Because we or somebody we know has been really, really burned by somebody who said, hey, this is what God said about you or about your life, and he never actually said those things. So we're going to keep each other accountable to everybody's favorite devotional book, the book of Judges. It's in the front quarter of your Bible, towards the beginning there, but some context as we're turning to Judges 13. Judges 13. Israel. Everybody say Israel. The people, not the place. God's chosen people are under a Philistine oppressive captivity and rule. The Philistines are like David and Goliath. Goliath was a Philistine, right? Because the Israelites, they kept neglecting God as he was growing them and calling them to be a people and a nation marked by him, marked by hope, saying we have something better, a better way to live life. They kept looking at God saying, no, we got this. We'll call you if we need you, right? And so over and over again, they kept doing that, but because they kept choosing things above and against what God said was a better way to live life, which, by the way, is the definition of sin. Anytime we say that, choosing something that is above and against what God said was a better way to live life, they found themselves in places over and over and over again, serving things that were harmful and oppressive and outside of their purpose. But it's in the midst of this Philistine rule over the Israelites that when it looked like the situation was permanent, like right now, we're just going to keep on keeping on with what we've got going on. That's all that my life is going to be. When it looks like God left them, we see that God was actually working all along. And I love this. But it starts with a woman who's barren. And barren is just a Bible word that we say a lot, but I don't think we really get it. This is the woman who's been trying to have kids, but she's struggling with the very real, very painful reality of infertility. Like, this is the woman in the doctor's office crying her heart out because all she wanted to do was be a mother, and now she's being told by the doctor that she can't. This woman is where it all starts. And it's in the midst of this painful reality that an angel of God encounters her and gives her this in chapter 13, verse 5. Check it out with me. It says this. He says to this woman, you will become pregnant and have a son, which is like everything she's ever prayed for. But it doesn't stop there. It keeps going. It says, whose head is never to be touched by a razor. You're never going to give him a haircut because the boy's to be a Nazarite. Hang on to that. Dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Pause. Everybody say Nazarite. A Nazarite is something that's really unique that was introduced into Israel about 400 years in the past prior to this moment, where a man or a woman could choose to make a unique vow to God. But it wasn't just like a I'm in kind of vow. It was going a vow of dedication. God, from this moment on, everything that I am is yours to be used for whatever you want. I need you to speak so that I can do. It was an intentional vow to say, I am in and I'm abandoning everything else. It was a step above. And so Nazarite was this, but to do that, they were given sort of some guidelines on how to do that well. The first of which had to do with diet. And it was what they were feeding themselves. They couldn't eat anything from a grapevine or anything that was fermented. So like anything like raisins, grapes, wine, vinegar, all of that was off limits for them in terms of what they were allowing themselves to put in their body. Okay, that was the first one, was diet. The second was to be a part of the vow of dedication. The Nazarite vow had to do with appearance. And I'm not talking about like they needed to look holy or something like that. It was the whole razor thing. They couldn't get a haircut. They allowed their hair to grow as the physical mark of the inward reality. Physically, I will look like this because of what I've decided in here. Okay? That was the second one. The third one was of association. They couldn't be near or touch any dead body, any corpse. If they did, if something died around them or they came into contact on accident or something like that, they would shave their hair that they've been growing out, sort of start again. I'm going to rededicate myself. I'm going to cleanse myself. I'm going to rededicate myself to God. Okay? Three things. Diet Appearance Association. Hang on to that because we're going to come back to it at the end. But what's unique about this instance is that Nazarites typically voluntary. Like, I want to do this for God. I want to be used by God. Samson was different in that he was chosen. It was prescribed over his life. There was a purpose on his life from the very beginning before it ever started. And don't miss this. Samson was chosen to be a Nazarite, to be set apart for something else, to be used by God, that we see in verse 5. You remember, Israel had turned their back on God. They were not about him anymore. They weren't even thinking of seeking him out again. They were just trying to deal. They were trying to manage their life now with this new oppressive rule of the Philistines. But before they ever sought out God again, God was already seeking them out. He was already working to save them from what they didn't even know. It went like this in verse 5. Look at it again. He will take the lead. Samson will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Samson's life was given purpose before it ever began. Samson would be the catalyst that would lead to freedom for his people. That's what he was set apart for, even before Israel even knew they wanted it. Listen, before we dive into his story, there's something that you have to know. You have to understand. You've got to get it in your heart. And if you don't take any notes, write this down at least. God is the giver and creator of all life. God never does anything without intentionality, without purpose. You were created with purpose, on purpose. You were created with purpose, on purpose. I think conceptually we know that, but most of us don't believe it. Right? I believe it with all my heart. I think sometimes we get so discouraged or confused because we look around and see that our context doesn't match our calling. Like, God, I know I'm created for more. I know I'm created to do this. I know I'm created to be hope, but nothing around me looks like that. There's nobody in my life speaking into that going, hey, you're going to be this. You're going to be amazing. You're going to lead your people to a place of redemption. Nothing in my life looks like that. But the first thing that we can learn from Samson's life is this. Your calling is not confined to your circumstances. Your calling is not confined to your circumstances. What goes on around you does not have the authority to be the definition of you. It doesn't have that power. Building margin in our hearts starts first and foremost with the clarification of our calling and understanding that it's only He who calls us who can define us. Building margin in our heart is the ongoing practice of reminding our heart that our calling is bigger than our context, no matter what it is that we're facing. So Samson was born in light of that, and we see at the end of chapter 13, it says the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him while he was growing up. Something was different about Samson. He looked different. He acted different. There was just something about him that drew the attention of people in the best way. But then we get to our first recorded moment in the life of Samson, and it's interesting to say the least. Check it out in 14, verse 1. Chapter 14, verse 1 says this, Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I've seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now go get her for me as my wife. Pause. Everybody say Timnah. Timnah was, we found archaeologists have found this city, and it was a thriving Philistine city. I mean, it was full of life. Like, it was a metropolis. And it's here that Samson just meanders in to the city full of the people that God set Samson apart for the purposes of freeing Israel from. And then when he was there, he sees a pretty girl, decides he wants her, and then this goes even deeper than just his calling as a Nazarite. This was something deeper into his identity. An Israelite, God's chosen people, weren't supposed to marry outside of their people. They were going to keep each other accountable in their walk with God and their pursuit of God. And so marrying outside of that was a huge no-no. But then on top of that, Samson goes against culture and instructs his parents, which is a weird request and not good dating advice, to go get that girl for his wife. Like, I want her, get her. Thanks, Mom and Dad. It's terrible dating advice. Samson, chosen by God, went where he shouldn't have been, saw something he desired outside of his calling, and sent his own people to go get it for him. He went, he saw, he got all of it outside of his purpose. And despite his parents' disappointment or suggestions otherwise, they agree to it, which is a whole other talk for a whole other day. But then this happens in verse 5 as a result of it. Check it out. It says, Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and his mother. So this is the second journey to Timnah. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, hang on to that, suddenly a young lion came roaring towards him. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands as he might have torn a young goat. Casual. But he told neither his father or his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with this woman, and he liked her. All right, first of all, I can totally rip apart a goat, so I don't know what the big deal is here. It's fine. But for Samson, this was a pivotal moment, because this was a double dosage of dumb and then a cherry on top. Here's what I mean. First of all, they're approaching the vineyards, the vineyards, the grapevines. What's the one thing Samson couldn't eat? It's the grape. Why is he there? This is a bad idea. This is a bad context, right? This is not a great place for him to be in. But second, as he's approaching somewhere where he probably shouldn't be anyway, in a region he shouldn't be in the first place, a lion came at him, and then he defended himself, which was the smart option, I would say, but it meant killing the lion or creating a corpse, a dead body. In a single moment, Samson completely disregards two of the three pieces in the vow that he lives within, and cherry on top, he didn't tell anybody about it. Samson is trying his best to live in light of this with zero accountability, so what's going to change? But then they come back home, and then verses 8 and 9 kind of unpack this weird moment where when they're ready to get married, they all go back down together. So this is the third time he's going down this place, but they're going on the same route through the vineyard. And then they see the corpse of the lion still there, and then he sees out of the corner of his eye that bees have made a nest in there, which means honey, and that's good. So he casually reaches his hand in the corpse of the lion to get the honey and then put it in his mouth, which is like I know I'm a germaphobe, but that's just gross. Like, this is everything that mom told me not to do as a kid when I pick stuff off the floor, right? So he's doing that, but then he brings that honey to his mom and dad, who he still didn't tell, by the way, and puts it in their mouth, which defiles them too. He's not just bringing himself down anymore. Samson goes on. After he gets married, they throw a 7-day party. It's awesome, which I would love to do at weddings now, but whatever. Can't take that PTO. Samson goes on to make a bet out of the lion and the honey that he's convinced nobody knows about, but then some people talk to his wife, which he happened to tell, and then they come back and they're like, hey, we win the bet, and because of the nature of the bet, he had to go kill 30 men to get their clothes, 30 Philistines. And then, after that, he got angry and he left his wife for a bit, just left. He went back home, left his wife to somebody else, but then came back after a while, and then taking revenge on the Philistines for cheating them in the riddle, he went and set like all of their crops on fire. And then the Philistines come and kill his wife and his family in retribution for that, but then Samson fought them off and then went and hid in a cave. But here's the reality with Samson, because right now we're looking at this guy going, you are so dumb. Like, there's nothing about this guy that should be in the Bible going, man, Samson is my life story. Like, this is a bad idea, right? But the reality with Samson and the reality with us is our actions will always have consequences. It's not just bad. I mean, listen, Samson was called to act in a way where the consequences would be the salvation of his people. Those were the consequences of the actions that he was meant for. But when his purpose met his pride, the consequences he brought were those of destruction. And it led to a lot of his own people, 3,000 Israelites, as he's hiding in the cave, come to find him, to hand him over back to the Philistines, because the Philistines are reasonably angry about everything that's happening, and they're wanting to hunt down Samson. So the Israelites say, listen, if you be nice to us, we'll hand him over. So they do. Because remember, the Israelites had no desire to seek God. No desire. They just want to manage their current context. But Samson fully embraced the momentum of the patterns of his pride instead of engaging the freedom of his faith to live up to what he was called to do, what he was created for. And it led to chapter 16. After all this, after every possible red flag you could ever pass in your life, and then some. And the verses before what we're landing on right now, they talk about a prostitute, an angry mob, and literally ripping the doors off hinges and running up a hill. You know, just casual Bible stuff. Okay? But he's a hot mess. And at least it's something that I think we're all at least a little familiar with. A girl named Delilah. Hey there. Check it out in verse 4 of chapter 16. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, a Philistine valley, whose name was Delilah. the rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so we can tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us, all of us asking you, are going to give you 1,100 shekels, 1,100 pieces of silver to do that. So Delilah said to Samson, hey, hun, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. All right. I feel like I shouldn't have to say this. If you're dating someone or seeing someone and they ask this question, it's what we would call a red flag. Fair? At this point, light bulbs should come on and say, she seems sketch. And you should have a counselor and some follow-up conversations. Samson doesn't. In all of his wisdom, he just lies to her, tells her something bogus like, hey, tie bowstrings around me, and you did it. And then she listens to him, but then he falls asleep and ties him up, doing exactly what he told her. And then she yells in the middle of the night after she tied him up, oh no, look what happens to be here to capture you, and you've given me all of this incredibly valuable information, and I don't know how this happened. It's all on accident. Look, it's the Philistines. What are we going to do? But because he was lying, he wasn't captured, so he just busted out of him and was like, no. So then, usually at this point, light bulbs are going off, and just everything points to no. Get out, right? This is a bad situation. Samson, bless his heart, sits down with Delilah again, and in verse 10, Delilah says this, then Delilah said to Samson, you've made a fool of me. That's what happened. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you could be tied. Buddy, this goes on not once, that we've already seen, not twice, that's this time, but thrice, another time. It happens afterwards. And it's the same conversation over and over and over again. And then it leads to this conversation in verse 15 when the third time didn't work. It says this, then she said to him, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? Okay. This is the third time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. And I'm not saying anything there. But he told her everything and the truth this time. She literally annoyed him into honesty, which is not marriage advice. But we're all super shocked at this result, right? Hey, Samson, what do you think in verse 19? After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for somebody to shave off the 7 braids of his hair. So began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out just as before and shake myself free. But he didn't know that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, took him down to Gaza, binding him with bronze shackles. They set him to grinding grain in the prison, but the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Pause. Why didn't he course correct? Why didn't he do something after passing any one of these? I mean, he was afforded every opportunity to say, you know what? No. He fell in love with something, or translation, he welcomed something with great affection into his life. Said, yeah, that's going to have a place in my life. That would sell him out the first chance it got and every chance after. But he tolerated it over and over and over again, getting what he wanted. And then when the moment came where his secret is out and it all hit the fan, he didn't even panic. Why? Because the last switch never flipped yet. So why would he? If we've been carrying on, nothing had blown up in his life, plenty of others' lives, but not his. So why would he ever course correct? Why would he ever do anything different? Because nothing bad really happened. Doesn't matter how many red flags or signs that you pass along the way if you're able to keep it together, right? At least that's my story. See, when Scripture says, though, can we pull that back up? I had to read this over and over again because it, one more. It was something that didn't make any sense to me, and I had to read it going, this cannot be true. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Did God really abandon the person that he miraculously brought into being, he chose, he grew, and he sent to do very specific things? Did God really abandon him? No. No, that's not what it's saying. But Samson's strength wasn't his own, right? That was from God. Before, Samson was just skirting around every possible aspect of his Nazirite vow without completely breaking it. But it brought him to a point of complacency because he was comfortable, to where he said, you know what, I'm invincible. I got this. And some of us, we're here. We're in this part of the story, or we're real close to it. We feel like we're at the point of no return, like we're too far gone, like we don't know how to turn this around. So we're just trying to manage whatever we've got going on, or we truly do believe that we are invincible. And we have no clue how to get back. We feel blind and bound. And listen to me, if you're there, if that's you, I want you to reread verse 22, because you're not ready for this. Verse 22 for you, if this is your story or you're right there, verse 22 is the most important pivotal moment of this entire story for you. Verse 22, what does it say again? It says, but the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Listen to me. What did the Nazirites have to do when they encountered a dead corpse? When they encountered something that they shouldn't have done, what did they have to do? Shave their head. What happens after they shave their head? It grows back. Samson was never too far gone. Samson made a mistake. Samson made a tidal wave of mistakes. But God wasn't done, because God made a promise. The promise directed Samson's purpose. Even though Samson abandoned his purpose, it doesn't negate the promise. Samson, blind, broken, and bound, was brought to the party that the Philistines threw to celebrate his capture and his humiliation. We won. We did it. He was the entertainment for the evening with the 3,000 or more people that came in attendance, including the leaders of the Philistine army. Everybody's there. And they led Samson in between the supporting pillars of the roof, where he would shortly tear down those pillars, bring down everything on the entire party, killing everyone. I think oftentimes we look at that victory and miss what happens in the middle, because I want you to hear what he says. Because this is something I know I've prayed in my life, and I've prayed it recently too. But I want you to see how wrong it is. Judges 16:28 says this. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me, with one blow, get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Pause. This wasn't wrong because of the whole revenge thing, or his focus was on his eyes. I mean, that's not great, okay? That's not why it was wrong. It started wrong. First sentence, Sovereign Lord, remember me. Y'all, look at this really quick. Chapter 14, verse 6. In the vineyard on his way to pick up his new wife, and the lion comes at him, and he has to defend himself. It says this, 14:6 says, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. Chapter 14, verse 19, when he gets caught in his own trap in the riddle that he makes to take out 30 men, as a result of it, he's doing something he shouldn't do in a place he shouldn't be in. It says this, then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. Chapter 15, verse 14, when his own people sell him out to the Philistines as a result of his own actions and the damage he's brought to all those around him, and finds himself face to face with the consequences of his own actions, it says this, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. Y'all, did God ever forget Samson? In any season where he shouldn't have been doing what he shouldn't have been doing, God never forgot him. Samson did. Samson forgot. But what I find most interesting in light of that, it's not right there. It's later on in the New Testament. On the other side of the Bible, there's a book called Hebrews. It's right towards the end. And there's a chapter in here, Hebrews 11. It's kind of nicknamed the Hall of Faith. And I find it really interesting because I love this chapter, and I read about people like Abel and people like Enoch and people like Abraham and people like Moses and people like Noah and all of these characters that are strong in their faith, following God, doing everything they can to passionately pursue Him. David is in here. And towards the end of the list, the author says, like Samson. Samson's listed by name because Samson was never too far gone for God. He was never too far gone, even after facing every consequence of his actions all along the way, despite everything that he did that flew in the face of his purpose. God's promise still stood. And Samson would take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. He wiped out their leaders. God's promise never wavered. Samson lost his purpose. And y'all, God has made a promise of redemption to the world. I mean, we all know it, John 3:16. God so loved who? The world. Gave His one and only Son so that whoever believes in Him wouldn't perish but have eternal life. Life that starts today and lasts forever. In that promise, He created you with purpose. It's up to you on whether or not you want to pursue that purpose in the promise. The purpose God gave you, it wasn't just so that you could survive, though. It's so that you could thrive. It wasn't just for you to be able to walk around fine because the last switch has never been flipped yet. It's so that even when you encounter the hardest moment, the darkest season, the deepest valley of your entire life, you're left standing on the other side. No matter what's happening around you. It was so that you could work on the brokenness in each and every one of us and allow God the space to redeem every part of us to the point where we can passionately pursue that which He has called us to do so that we can be a beacon of hope and life in our world, so that our marriages would thrive, our families would choose joy, our schools would become full of life, our workplaces would be a space of hope because you're there through the power of the Holy Spirit speaking life. So how do we do that? Well, I want to look at the things that God gave Samson to start off with, and then I wonder what would happen if we actually followed it. Diet, appearance, association, and I want to refocus this to our hearts. So diet, it doesn't mean what we eat. I'm talking about this. What are you allowing to feed your heart and soul? Because something's pouring in. What is it? Feed your heart and soul. And this has to be with intentionality because there will always be something that we consume. We get to be the dictators of what that is, though. It's kind of like this. I have incredibly bad asthma since about second grade. And every single morning, ever since I can remember, I have to take steroids just to be able to breathe for the day. And every morning I have my morning routine. I go and I brush my teeth, I floss my teeth, I take a shower, I do my hair, I do all these different things. And most of the time, because I just want to go get coffee, I'm doing multiple things at once, and I'm doing it very quickly. But then, when I have to take my inhaler, if I do anything else while I do it, it doesn't work. Because I have to take it, inhale all the way, inhale deep down into my gut. It's not just a breathe, it's a gut. And I have to hold my breath like that for 10 seconds. And then release. And then I have to do it again. 2 doses. But I had to go through some different medications to find out the one that worked for me and the way that I was created and what I need to be able to breathe in my life again. I think oftentimes we treat our inflow, what's feeding our heart and soul, as a checkbox. It's not a checkbox, it's a deep breath. It's a pause. It's a moment to say, I'm present. So what is that? None of these are going to be really practical for you because I can't tell you what that is. It's between you and God. But what are you allowing to feed your heart and your soul? The second is this, appearance. And we're not talking about like how good you look or like that you cover your mess ups really, really well. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about this. When people look at you, what do they see? What's different about your life? Do people look at you and see a joy that doesn't make sense? Do they see hope in a space of hurt? I think this last year, This last year, and I say that we, the church, the big C, Christians, we've waged a lot of really weird wars and taken stances that we died on the hill for, and it burned a lot of bridges. Because there's some friends of mine, knowing that I'm a pastor, over this last year, those last 2 years, went through some of the hardest seasons of their life. The place they looked for hope wasn't anything I was associated with. Because we chose to die on some hills that didn't matter. I love Erwin McManus. He wrote a book called The Last Arrow. He's pastor of Mosaic Church. He wrote this: there may not be anything worse than winning a battle you never should have fought in the first place. God isn't interested in your culture war. Jesus is never a part of your cancel culture. Because if he was, you would have been canceled a long time ago. What's different about your life? What's different about your life? Samson had the t-shirt. Everybody could see his hair, but his life didn't look any different. We have the t-shirt. It says anything's possible. Do we live like that's true? Do we live like that's true? Last one, association. We've died appearance association. Association means this. It's not just like, I don't hang out with those people. You is those people, all right? What are you hanging on to that's killing your heart? The thing you keep coming back to over and over and over and over again. What is it that's defining you, that you're allowing it that power over your life? Because the reality is, the more time we spend with death in our life, the more our lives begin to embody it. What are you hanging on to that's killing your heart?